I just read a book, the most recent book I read about a guy who was known as the Hermit of the Adirondacks, Noah John Rondeau,
Right.
called Life with Noah. And this book, probably the latest book written about Noah John, right?
Yes, it is. That's the latest. There's only been 2 books about him, and of course there are a lot of articles in magazines and whatever.
And a most interesting character in this book says the stories and adventures of Richard Smith with Noah John Rondeau, written by William J. O'Hearn. The reason I mention that first is because it's the most recent, and Richard spent time with Noah John, off and on, for a few years.
Yes, he did.
And he knew him right until his old age, and Noah John Rondeau died in the early 60s, as I recall.
Somewhere in there, I think he was 84. And he's buried up there in Lake Placid somewhere, or was it Saranac Lake?
I think in Lake Placid. I think you're right. Absolutely. Well, let's start there, because we got some great pictures of Noah John Rondeau. How did you happen to meet up with this guy?
Well, I was a counselor at a camp, and we decided we'd take a canoe trip. And so he was ahead of the trip, and I was the second counselor, and we had about, I think, half a dozen campers with us. And he apparently knew Noah Rondeau. He had been in there to see him, and we were taking the Fulton chain of lakes. So we started at Old Forge, and we went up through the various lakes, up through Long Lake, and finally into the Racket River. And in a mile up the river, the Cold River comes into the Racket. That's where we stopped, cached our canoes, and we hiked up 6 miles up the Cold River to Rondeau's camp. He called it the city, one with a population of 1, and he was the mayor. Well, anyway, Rondeau wasn't at home. We saw where he had a fire. It was still smoldering a little bit. We knew he was around somewhere, so we waited and waited. He never did come, but I was fascinated by what I saw there. He had wigwams. He built the wigwams.
He had quite a little city, didn't he, huh?
He did. He had about 3 wigwams and 2 small cabins. And so I made it a point that later on I would come back and find him. So I did. And he was home the next time I arrived there. And from there on, we've made several, we made a number of trips. In fact, I even stayed in there one full week while we made a pack basket. And making it means you start from scratch. We cut a tree. It had to be a brown ash growing in a swamp.
Ash, yep.
And what one does is one peels the bark and then pounds it, and you get the strips. The yearly growths peel up, and
each ring would.
Yes, and you put some slices in longitudinal slices in the log, so that they come out the width of the strips that you need. And then you weave the pack basket.
Viewers are wondering, what do we have? First of all, you showed me what Noah John Rondeau's handwriting looks like in a letter that was written to you on July 1st, 1945. And he even had papers with his name on it. Noah John Rondeau, mayor of Cold River, Corries, New York.
Yep.
And he called you dear old people.
Yep.
Don't you love it?
Yep.
Well, you know, this wasn't just Noah John Rondeau was a multifaceted individual. He's by some people a little bit misunderstood.
He's self-educated.
Self-educated,
Yep.
but he was a pretty intelligent guy, could talk on quite a few subjects.
Yes, he was, yeah.
He developed some very interesting codes because he had a long-standing feud with the New York State Department of Conservation.
Yes, he certainly did, yes.
He didn't like all those rules and regulations and didn't want people messing in his stuff. What Noah John Rondeau did in the early part of the last century, it seems funny for me to talk about the 20th century as the last century.
Yeah.
But what he did was live in a way that would be difficult to do today, right? It would be very difficult because they used parts of the old logging camps to build their huts.
That's what he did, yeah.
And
it was actually one of the cabins that remained after the close of the whatever they were doing there.
Yeah, and you get in there and you
logging camp.
Logging camps, and you take their whatever old iron stove they left, and you'd move it over to your place. And
he had some of that stuff. That's right.
But he was, when we call people a hermit, we generally mean that they divorced themselves completely from society. But Noah John didn't necessarily do that.
No, he didn't.
Even when he was in the woods, he would always entertain people like Dittmar, and friends would stop by, and it wasn't uncommon for him to have 4 or 5 people sharing that big pot of whatever he had stewing up in there.
That's right. He always said he had his food protected in garbage cans that he had dug a hole, and he just had the cover showing, and he always said, well, come back and have something good out of the garbage can.